This is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the SteelSeries Apex Pro TKL wireless. This is an updated version of the SteelSeries Apex Pro, and this is the 2023 model, which will set you back around £229 or $249, so it's expensive. But here I'm going to show you some of the highlights, including showing off what a difference it makes if you use SteelSeries Prism keycaps that you can see installed on the left-hand side of the keyboard here. I'm going to talk to you about the various different highlights, the features, the specs, and more. I'm going to unbox it and show what's included in the box, and then I'll talk about my experiences with it because I've been using it for the last couple of weeks, gaming, working, and just generally doing all sorts of stuff with it. And I do like it. I was a big fan of the original Apex Pro when I tested it for a number of different reasons. The lighting's really nice, and it obviously has some really nice customization. Now, this keyboard's been upgraded in a number of ways. It now includes the SteelSeries OmniPoint 2.0 switches, which have customizable actuation, and that's one of the most interesting things about the Apex Pro lineup. If you don't know already, these are switches that you can customize the actuation point on it. So normally you buy a keyboard with a certain type of switch on it, usually like Cherry MX switches, for example, Cherry MX reds or browns or blues. This one uses SteelSeries' own switches, but those normal switches you get from Cherry have a set actuation level, usually about 1.8 millimeters or somewhere around there for gaming. This keyboard allows you to adjust the levels between 0.2 millimeters and 3.8. More on what that means later on. Now, in the box, you get a USB-C charging cable, the keyboard itself, a keycap puller, you'll notice in a little box up there, and a dongle that's included as well for the wireless, because this uses both Bluetooth and USB-C, so you have the option to switch between those, and you get a different battery life depending on what you're using. So it's 2.4 gigahertz wireless or Bluetooth. You can get up to 37.5 hours with the wireless mode or 45 hours with the Bluetooth, and that's just with standard lighting, so you could probably squeeze more out with the RGB turned down. There's also a magnetic wrist rest that you can see here. It has a couple of clips on it, basically just slots into place, snaps quite nicely. It has a sort of soft rubber finish on top of it, but doesn't have any padding to it really. So if you're expecting like a nice soft plush cushioned wrist rest, you might be disappointed. The keyboard itself is fairly stealthy coming out of the box. You saw the difference of what it looks like with the RGB turned on and just how much difference that makes. But you can see when you get out of the box, it kind of is quite dark and stealthy and not that obvious with like the letterings. The lettering isn't terribly clear. It's not really bright white light lettering, for example. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is a good looking keyboard for multiple reasons. Now in here, you'll find a couple of dongles. So you've got the USB dongle, which is USB-C, and then you've got an adapter. So if you don't have a USB-C connection on your PC that you can plug the 2.4 gigahertz dongle into, not to worry, because you can plug it into that adapter and then into the cable and then into your PC, and that's how you get the connection. You also have a keycap puller included, so you can take the keycaps off, which means that you can then get your own keycaps and fit them on there. Obviously, this is a standard layout. This is a UK layout, so that's why you've got a small left shift and big enter key, in case you're wondering, and that's worth keeping in mind. But you can fit your own keycaps, and in this video I'm going to show you what happens if you put the SteelSeries Prism keycaps on there. But you'll see the standard RGB lighting is actually quite nice. In the top right you have a little OLED screen, which you can customize with the SteelSeries engine software, and then there's a tiny little wheel up the top here, which adjusts the volume. You can also push it in. That's a multi-action wheel, so you can push it in, you can also press that little button down the bottom, you can double tap it and things like that. So you can basically, it's media playback button as standard, and you can use that in various ways. You also see there are some other things, because the other thing that's interesting about this keyboard is it has a meta layer, so a secondary layer of actions that you can program. Some are set to default in there, and you'll see more of that. I'll show you in the software later on in the video what you can do and customize it. But basically you have a secondary layer that's already programmed into it and extra actions that you can set yourself. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in what you set up and the key presses that you have as well. See another look at the wrist rest here. As I said, it's held on with magnets, so it just clips into place really easily. I like this because it means there's no plastic clips that you can accidentally break, and it's easy to remove when you don't want to use it. You'll see the underside, it has rubbered feet, so it doesn't slip around. Now the magnets are good enough that you're not constantly knocking it out of the way, and it is held in place nicely still as well. Now, as I said earlier on, I'm also going to do a sound test at the end of the video, so I want you to be able to hear the sounds of the keycaps and just the delivery of it, because I feel like they've done some dampening effects on there to make it a little bit nicer to type on than the previous Apex keyboards. It's not the quietest around. You can see that you do have 2 feet on the underside, so you can adjust the height and angle of it, but it's fairly compact with an ever so slight slope towards the back, so it does raise up a little bit. I found it comfortable to use throughout the day for typing and working on. However, it is a little bit louder, and that is a consideration if you've got a mic that picks up a lot of background noise. You will spy, if you look closely at the RGB lighting, that some of the colors change on some of the key switches that are doing other things. You'll notice that the caps lock is white, for example. Obviously that means caps lock's on, but there are some other elements to it. So when you press a SteelSeries key, as I'll show you in a second, some of the other letters change color as well. As I said initially, you can't really see the lettering when the RGB's off, but as you can see when the RGB's on, you can clearly see all the lettering there. Some of the secondary layers aren't etched, so the RGB doesn't shine through. So you'll see the Euro sign on the number 4, for example, doesn't, and also some other keys on the top right. Keycaps come off easily enough, and they are Cherry MX style, so if you want to switch them out, despite the fact this doesn't have Cherry MX switches on it, you can obviously purchase Cherry MX keycaps, and they will fit on there quite nicely. These are PBT double shot, so they should last, and they will not rub off over time. They also give you a nice solid feel to them, and there's very little wobble in there. There's a nice overall design, so it's a good balance actually, because the etching is good enough that lighting shines through quite well. There's no dark spots particularly on the lettering, and with PBT you often find that some of the lettering is a little bit dark, but for the most part on this keyboard it isn't the case. The switches are the most interesting thing about it, and they are obviously hidden underneath the keycaps, but these are highly adjustable switches because you can tweak them on a key by key basis, and I'll show you more of what that means later on. But essentially the keycaps are programmable in different levels of actuation, and you can choose between 37 different levels of actuation between 0.2 and 3.8 millimeters. And that is basically highly adjustable to the point where if you set it to 0.2, for example, a very gentle keystroke is enough to activate the key. If you set it to 3.8, you really have to push the key all the way down in order to activate it. This is beneficial because there's actually a dual actuation setup as well. So you can set it so that you have the key doing different things depending on what level of actuation it hits. I'll show you more about what that means later on in the GG software, but it essentially means that you can have 2 actions on a key where you're basically pressing it in a short distance. It does one thing, push it further, it does another. So for example, you could program W for walk, but then you could program W if you press it harder to run, if you're playing an FPS game, for example. What you will notice is if you set it to a really low actuation at 0.2 millimeters, the keyboard obviously responds really quickly, and they say it's got a response of 0.54 milliseconds. What this means in the real world is it's very easy to accidentally activate a key. So you may well find that you're accidentally setting your key off when you don't mean to be. So this can be a problem when typing, for example, and it was something that I found initially when I started using the keyboard. If you set it too low, you accidentally activating things when you don't want to. Now, if you press the SteelSeries key, you'll see some of the other keys change color. You'll notice a number of them change color. This highlights what ones are programmed with another action already. So you can see that you've got the Windows key, the top F keys, I and O are all set to various things, and those are programmed within the SteelSeries software. You can customize more, and then those keys will light up. Essentially what it's doing is it's showing you the secondary layer of things, so you can program extra actions into it beyond what's there. This is really handy on a TKL keyboard, which has obviously lost the numpads as some of the potential functionality, and you can adjust and customize that and basically add more into it, which is pretty fantastic. On the rear, at the top left, you'll find the USB-C charging port and then a button to switch between Bluetooth and wireless modes. If you put it into the middle, that turns it off. And obviously you can charge it up with USB-C. Now, as I said, I found that it lasts quite a while. They say up to around 37 hours in the 2.4 gigahertz, which is the one that you want to use when you're connected to your PC. One of the things that I have found is when it's in wireless mode, it has got a sleep setting on it, so it will go to sleep if you step away from your PC for a bit. You then have to press a key and wait a couple of seconds for it to turn back on, which can be frustrating sometimes if you're impatient. It doesn't take long, It just takes a little bit of time just to sort of wake back up again, and then you can start using it again. But otherwise, it's pretty flexible. You will have noticed when you switch between the two modes, the lights on the top row also flash a different color to let you know. So when you put it in Bluetooth mode, the sort of top row will let you know that you're in Bluetooth mode by flashing blue, and it flashes white instead if you're using it in the wireless mode. Now, I just wanted to set it up with some Prism keycaps, and the reason I've only done half the keyboard is I wanted to demonstrate the difference between the white Prism keycaps on the left and the standard keycaps on the right. These are SteelSeries keycaps. I'll link to them in the description. Essentially, they are pudding keycaps, so half of the bottom of them is translucent, basically allows for a bit more RGB to shine through, and I think this looks a lot nicer, has a nicer aesthetic to it, and it really shows the difference between the standard lighting and sort of what you'd get with pudding keycaps. But I will say that still the lighting's really nice on it, and obviously also customizable within the software. So loads of things that you can change that aren't immediately obvious. There's lots of settings to tweak within GG software. So you need to stick with me for a second to see that, and then stick around for the sound test. But what you'll see is from multiple angles, it really looks the part. A nice comfortable typing experience, a great looking keyboard, and loads of customization. It is, however, very, very expensive, so it's worth bearing that in mind. But I think the level of customization and other things make it really interesting, and also the sound dampening. So I noticed, if you watch out and listen for it, spacebar and enter key and other keys around those sorts of keys also sound a lot nicer than previous Apex keyboards. So stick around now to hear that and to see the software. Here we are in SteelSeries GG, and this is the software that you use to control the Apex Pro TKL. If you click on Engine, you can see that it's currently got about 20% battery power remaining. Now, there are a number of different settings in here. Obviously, we can go into lighting in a minute, but one of the things that I want to show you immediately is this actuation level changes. So you can see meta binding. So this is the secondary layer of actions that I was talking about a minute ago. Essentially, this allows you to change between various different settings by just pressing and holding the SteelSeries button. So if you do that, you'll see the other letters lighting up. And you can see that when you do that, for example, that I and O light up here on the keyboard. And that is actually set as default to actuation level up and down. So you can basically go between the various different actuation levels. So under the actuation, you can see that we have 3.8 and 0.2. So 0.2 is obviously the shortest actuation level, 3.8 is the maximum. So basically by just pressing the SteelSeries key and I or O, so if we want to go down to 0, we just press SteelSeries key and O all the way down, and that allows for some really quick actuations. So the way to demonstrate this is if we just open up Notepad, and then essentially what I can do now is a very gentle touch. So you can see a very small depression on the keyboard results in a key press here. So I'll just show this from a different angle. So now if I press H, for example, very, very light touch is required to activate those keys. Now, obviously, if we go the other way, and then you can see now I've set the actuation completely the other way, and you have to basically press the whole thing all the way in. You can't just do the light touch anymore. You have to press it right down in order for that key to activate. So you can see on the fly you can change that, but you can also do that within the software settings itself to change it significantly for each key. So you have the ability to add some extra bindings. Now, one of the ones that I have done as a quick demonstration here is you can see the insert key. So this is one of the ones that I've assigned. There are some that already exist in the actuation up and down, and then you have the switch profile and the F buttons. And then I've made this print screen button, which is on insert. So essentially by pressing the SteelSeries button at insert, that now activates the print screen option, which then allows me to capture screenshots. That print screen button doesn't exist anywhere on the keyboard, and that obviously would have existed on a full-size keyboard with the dedicated numpad and all those extra buttons. That doesn't exist now, but it gives you the ability to add it in. And obviously you can go through and you can add keyboard buttons. So you'll see, obviously, you can add any sort of extra button that you wanted to in here from all sorts of standard key presses. and various different things and commands. So you can see print screen is in there, for example, arrow keys and the numpad as well. So if you want to add a numpad in to your TKL keyboard, you can do it through the meta layer. So essentially you can add a multitude of extra buttons in, and perhaps you can add in something extra. So you could have a macro as obviously another option. So we could set it up so we could have a macro on here. So you can obviously just click to record your own macro, and then you could assign it to a button. And then obviously as standard, E is E, but then if you press and hold the SteelSeries button to open up the meta layer, you can then press E and get a different thing, so an action. So lots of different things that you can do with that secondary layer, and you can see sort of all the different ones that you can do it through. So you can basically do it through any key. As standard, they're obviously mostly deactivated, and you can then create something else, and you can even have mouse button actions. So lots of different customization in there. Now, as I said, the actuation, obviously you can do it at a hardware level, so you can up and down it by holding the SteelSeries button and then press an I and O to change those levels. But you can also customize the entire keyboard, so you can, well, at least this region here. If you try and select the whole thing, it'll only be set to that region. So the sort of main body of the keyboard, not the F keys and things, but you can adjust that actuation level. So again, if you set it really low, it's going to be a feather light touch on those keys. And if you set it really high, it's going to be a more detailed press. What I found is if you have it really low, for just general typing purposes, you're going to find that a bit problematic because it will probably activate a bit too quick. But most gaming keyboards would usually be somewhere around 1.8 to 2 millimeters. So if you set it a bit higher, let's say 1.2, you'll find that that reacts really quickly, and it's ideal for gaming. And actually, you'll probably find that really close to that featherlight touch is ideal for gaming because you want it to be responsive and low latency, but then you'll probably have to turn it back up for just sort of everyday typing. Otherwise, what you'll find is you'll go to type a letter and you'll end up with loads of them instead. So if you go to type the letter G, for example, you'll end up with 10 Gs where you only manage to get one. So you have to sort of play around with it. But obviously, you can also select specific keys. So we could, for example, just have this group of sort of the main gaming keys, like the WASD area, and you could set those as being the low sort of actuation level, and then you could have the rest of the keyboard as high actuation. Obviously, you'll also have the option to customize this on the fly. Now, again, you can also change the key bindings. So you can remap a lot of different keys as well, so you can change the keys to be other things. So if you want to program something, you can. And you could, for example, disable the caps lock and maybe set it up as a macro or something like that. So there's plenty of customization there. Although, frankly, you'll probably be using the meta bindings more because that opens up a lot of layers. You will have to sort of remember what keys you've programmed with what, though, obviously, because there's no extra sort of labeling with the meta bindings unless you've got the software open. So I've set print screen as insert. Well, I'd need to remember that's what I'd done. The other bonus, though, is that it will change color once you've done it. So once you've assigned a meta layer to it, when you press the SteelSeries button, it will have a different color on it to at least suggest that that button has been reprogrammed with something else. So that's pretty handy. Now, the dual bindings thing is the thing I was talking about earlier on, which is essentially you can have a maximum of 8 dual action key binds permitted. So you can have basically an extra level of key binding in here. So you can set up a macro or a keyboard button or something else. Let's say we want a quick macro. So what my example was is you've got W as your standard one, and then we have a macro which is going to be something really simple. So now what we've got is we've got it set for this dual binding. So essentially what we've done is set an actuation level of one sort of height, and then a second one, which will go Shift W. So essentially what we're doing in here is you press W to walk forward, because that's obviously what forward is in most games. And then if you press it in harder, it'll go Shift W, which is essentially holding Shift and running. So you're then running forward. Obviously, this is just one silly example. You could assign macros to that extra layer, but it's basically a light press followed by a harder press. You need to assign a actuation level to it in order to do it. And you are limited, as I said, you can only have 8 dual bindings maximum. But you probably wouldn't set up a great deal of these, but you do have the option to go through a variety of things. You also have the SteelSeries screen in the top right. Now, I will say this used to be really good on the original Apex because it included things like Spotify, so you could have Spotify in here and tell you what the name of the song you're listening to is. I kind of think the screen is a little bit of a gimmick. Now, this will depend on how you sit, but it is set quite far back in the keyboard, and if you lean back in your chair, you really can't see it very easily. It's a nice addition, but I think that you have to sort of sit really bolt upright in order to be able to see the screen anyway, so it's kind of limited. But you can upload your own little profiles, obviously as the SteelSeries one is standard. If you're able to draw, you can draw one on here. For example, I could just write Prawn on here in a terrible way. Let's go write Prawn. It's possible to do that, and now I'll say Prawn on there. Obviously, if you're a bit more talented, you could maybe draw something on there. Perhaps we could try and find an icon. Probably want a better one than that. And so we're going to reset that to default. So kind of gimmicky, but you can do some other things with it, potentially. Now, in terms of the RGB lighting, you'll see that it has active and reactive effects. So you have the active ones, which is what's kind of happening as standard. And you can cycle through various things. And we'll just do that now for a minute. So you can see we've got a breathing effect. You have a single color. So we could set it to a single color, for example, blue here. You could go all the way to white. And whatever else you want. You can change color shift. So it basically goes through different colors. Breathing, all the usual standard ones that you'd expect. Vapor Dreams is kind of a nice one. West Coast. Haze, Prism. Chasing Ghosts. And Warp Drive. You then have the option to have a reactive area as well, and you can make it ripple. So we could set some of the keys to be reactive, and then essentially having a effect come out of there from it. So you can set that, and then we can press a button. And it's probably nicer if your active one is just a standard color. So let's set a standard color. And then we'll have a rippling effect going out of it. Now, some of the other things you can do with the display is you can have system monitor set up, so you can choose from various different things that you'll put on the screen. So you see the option to turn this on, and then it's basically an app that you can configure in there. So we can set to see, for example, CPU data, GPU data, and other things. And you can see that it'll cycle through these various different things and let you know what's going on with it, which is a nice little at a glance sort of thing. And it is nice to have this data on there and be able to see that. There are other apps, so you can see if you've got a Tidal account, you can use that. Sadly, I don't have one. There used to be a Spotify. That doesn't exist anymore. So the uses of it is kind of limited, but there are other things. You also have one for Discord, which you can do custom different effects in there. And this can be used on the screen as well. So it can show you sort of who's joined, for example, or who's talking in the little screen as well. Again, a bit difficult because you can't easily see it. So I think that's kind of like a bit more of a gimmicky part of it. But overall, a nice keyboard with plenty of customization, as you can see. Hopefully you found this video useful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions. Subscribe if you haven't already. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.